Have you ever gone silent on someone who pulled away from you, hoping maybe, just maybe your absence would make them realize what they're missing, only to see them act like they couldn't care less? Hi, I'm Jim Rohn, and if that's a familiar emotional spiral for you, then you're in the right place. Today we're unpacking a question that's haunted so many people in emotionally lopsided relationships. Does an avoidant actually miss you when you go silent? The short answer, yes, but probably not in the way you think, and certainly not in the timeline your heart is hoping for. If you've ever been with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, you know the pain of their sudden distance. One moment you're close, the next they're cold. You pull back, maybe to protect yourself, maybe to see if they'll notice. And when they don't respond right away or seem to move on effortlessly, you start questioning everything. Did I ever matter? Are they even thinking about me? This video is going to shift your perspective, because what avoidants feel and what they show are rarely the same. We'll dive into the psychology behind their delayed emotional response, why they often seem fine during your silence, and how that silence actually disrupts their emotional pattern in ways you can't always see. But more importantly, we're going to talk about what you do with that silence, because the goal isn't to make them miss you, it's to help you stop abandoning yourself in relationships that don't feel safe. So if you've been holding your breath, waiting for someone to come back, or just trying to make sense of what your silence means to them, make sure you stick around. Hit that subscribe button, because we're going to cut through the confusion and get to the truth. You deserve real clarity, not just false hope. Let's get into it, because sometimes silence isn't just space, it's power. And how you use it changes everything. 1. Avoidants seem unaffected at first. Let's start with what hurts the most. When you go silent, the avoidant seems completely unbothered. They look fine, maybe even happier. They're posting vacation photos, hanging out with friends, diving into work or hobbies like nothing ever happened. And there you are, sitting with a knot in your stomach, replaying every moment, trying to figure out how they moved on so quickly while you're stuck in emotional quicksand. But here's what you need to know: what you're seeing on the outside isn't the full story. That calm, detached exterior is often a protective mask, not a sign they don't care. Avoidantly attached people are emotionally wired to disconnect under stress. When things get too intimate or emotionally intense, their survival instinct is to shut down, pull away, and distract themselves. It's not because they're cold or heartless, it's because they've learned, often since childhood, that emotional closeness feels dangerous or overwhelming. So when you go silent, it may seem like they've bounced back effortlessly, but what's really happening is that they're falling back into their default mode, emotional suppression. I once coached a man named Tyler, who had just stopped contact with his avoidant ex. He said, "She's out there living her best life like I never even mattered. How can she be so unaffected?" But when we broke it down, he realized something important. She wasn't thriving, she was distracting. She was filling her schedule to the brim, avoiding any space that might make her feel something uncomfortable. That's a classic avoidant response. Keep moving, stay busy. Don't feel. It's a defense system, not indifference. In fact, the more an avoidant cares, the more likely they are to hide from that care, because vulnerability feels like a threat to their autonomy. So they don't talk about you, they don't reach out. They may even convince themselves that it's for the best. But deep down, something very different is brewing. Your silence, if sustained with emotional detachment and boundaries, begins to interrupt their emotional pattern. At first they numb out, but over time, that numbness often turns into restlessness. The point here is not to wait for them to break, it's to understand that their silence doesn't mean you didn't matter. It means they're protecting themselves from emotions they were never taught how to handle. And the more grounded you remain in your silence, not as punishment, but as self-respect, the more you start shifting from their emotional orbit back into your own center. That's where the real power lies, not in getting a reaction, but in reclaiming your peace. 2, your silence disrupts their pattern. Here's something most people don't realize until they've lived it. Your silence doesn't go unnoticed. It disrupts the avoidance emotional pattern in a big way. Avoidantly attached individuals are used to a certain dynamic in relationships. It usually goes like this: they pull away when things get emotionally intense, and their partner, especially if they're more anxiously attached, rushes in to fix it. You text, you reach out, you try to understand what went wrong. This reassures the avoidant. It tells them, I can disappear and they'll still be there. I don't have to stretch emotionally. Someone else will close the gap for me. But the moment you stop doing that, the moment you stop chasing and go silent, everything in their emotional script gets flipped. They no longer have control over the pace, the emotional temperature, or the direction of the relationship. And for someone whose whole attachment strategy revolves around control and emotional distance, that's deeply unsettling. I worked with a woman named Kayla who had been in a 2-year on-again, off-again dynamic with an avoidant partner. Every time they had conflict, he'd pull away, and she'd try to mend things. She thought that showing patience and unconditional love would eventually soften him, but instead it created a loop. He learned that he could disappear and she'd be there when he came back. The pattern only changed when she did something different. One day after another round of ghosting, she simply didn't reach out. No angry messages, no closure talk, just silence, and that silence wasn't cold, it was calm, grounded. And over time he felt it, not immediately, but weeks later he started testing the waters, liking old photos, sending random texts, trying to get a reaction. That's the moment many people confuse with real change. But here's what's important: your silence is not a trick to get them back. It's a shift in the dynamic that forces them to sit with what they usually avoid: emotional discomfort. It makes them feel a loss of control, a sense of disconnection they didn't prepare for. And while they may not show it right away, they feel the difference. The avoidant may start asking themselves, why aren't they reaching out? Did I lose them? Are they moving on? Not because they've suddenly developed emotional maturity, but because they're no longer receiving the comfort of being pursued without having to engage emotionally. And that discomfort, if they're emotionally aware, can lead to growth. But if they're not, it might just trigger a new cycle of testing and retreating. Either way, the disruption you create by not reaching out gives you space to breathe, reflect, and choose whether this pattern is something you want to keep repeating. Your silence becomes your boundary becomes your clarity, and that clarity, unlike their confusion, is yours to keep. 3, a slow-burning emotional response. Avoidantly attached people don't process emotions in real time the way anxiously attached or secure individuals often do. Instead, their emotional response tends to be slow-burning, delayed, conflicted, and filtered through layers of defense. So while it might seem like your silence has no impact at first, what's really happening under the surface is far more complex. In the beginning, they feel relief. The pressure is off. They're back in control of their space. But as time goes on and the dust settles, something begins to shift. A quiet sense of loss creeps in, one they don't know how to name or face. This is where the internal tug-of-war begins. A part of them starts to miss you, not necessarily because they're ready to change, but because the emotional bond didn't disappear. It's just buried under fear. They begin to feel your absence, not dramatically, but in small, surprising ways. They may notice how peaceful the connection felt compared to their usual chaos. They may remember the way you listened, how safe you made emotional closeness feel, or how much calmer they were with you. But instead of acting on these feelings, they retreat further inward. Why? Because missing you means confronting the very intimacy they've spent their lives avoiding. I once worked with a client named Sam who said, I haven't heard from her in 3 months, but she's still watching all my stories. She even liked a post from 2 years ago. These small actions, liking, viewing, or responding to something subtle, are often the avoidance way of expressing connection without vulnerability. They may want to reach out, but the idea of being emotionally exposed, or worse, being rejected, feels unbearable. So they choose the safer route, distance with low-effort signals. It's also common for avoidants to rationalize their silence. They might convince themselves that reaching out will make them look weak, or they'll tell themselves, "You've probably moved on anyway." This is how their protective walls stay intact. Even if they miss you, their fear of rejection or emotional messiness is louder than their longing. The result, a conflicted state of mind that keeps them stuck and keeps you waiting if you're not careful. That's why it's so important not to measure their care by their silence. The feelings may be there, but they're tangled in resistance. And unless they choose to work through that resistance, you're better off focusing on the one thing you can actually count on: your own emotional clarity and peace. They often return late and cautiously. One of the most confusing parts of being involved with an avoidant partner is how they seem to pop back into your life just when you've started to let go. After weeks or even months of silence, they show up with a casual, "Hey, how have you been?" Or they suddenly like your post, or send you a meme that reminds them of something you once laughed about together. And you're left wondering, why now? What does this mean? The truth is, avoidants often return late and very cautiously. It's not necessarily because they've worked through their emotional baggage. More often, it's because the emotional pressure they've buried is finally starting to surface. Avoidants don't usually have those big aha moments right after a breakup. Instead, their emotional awareness unfolds in a slow, delayed way. At first, they may feel relieved by the space, but over time, your absence starts to echo. It's not just about missing you. It's about the familiarity, the emotional safety you provided, or the comfort of knowing someone was there. When that disappears, it pokes at the very insecurity they try to keep buried, the fear of emotional irrelevance. I had a client, Leah, who went no contact after an on and off relationship with her avoidant ex. She held firm, no angry texts, no chasing, just space. 3 months later, he messaged her at midnight, "Hey, I had a dream about you, hope you're okay." It threw her off. But what she realized with a bit of perspective was that the message wasn't about her. It was about him. His need for emotional regulation without the risk of true intimacy. It was cautious, it was late, and it was emotionally safe for him. So yes, avoidants often come back. But not because they've changed. They come back because the silence became louder than their fear, just enough for them to peek out, but not always enough to truly show up. Your power is in not mistaking that curiosity for commitment, because a message isn't a miracle, it's just a moment. What comes after matters far more. 5. Their return is often cautious or manipulative. When avoidants return, it's rarely bold and emotionally open. Instead, their return is often cautious or even manipulative, though not always intentionally. They're not necessarily trying to hurt you. In fact, most of the time, they're trying to protect themselves. Avoidants often struggle to manage their own emotions, especially when it comes to vulnerability and closeness. So when they do reach out, it's usually a test, a soft ping to see if the door is still open, that "hey stranger" text, the random reaction to your story, the vague "I was just thinking about you." Those are emotional probes, not commitments. What's happening in those moments is they're trying to re-establish emotional safety for themselves, not for you. They're not necessarily coming back with clarity, intention, or accountability. More often they're reaching out because they're uncomfortable with the silence, or they're lonely, or they need to soothe their own anxiety. This is where things get tricky, because for you it can feel like a breakthrough. They miss me, they're reaching out. But if the pattern after that initial message looks the same, vague, avoidant, emotionally inconsistent, then you're not witnessing change. You're just seeing the cycle reset. I worked with a man named Jordan who had been through this exact loop. His avoidant ex would go silent for weeks, then message him late at night saying things like, "I was thinking about that time we sat by the lake. It felt romantic. It stirred hope." So he'd reply warmly, only for her to disappear again after a brief exchange. This happened 4 times in 6 months. Eventually, he realized these weren't attempts to rebuild connection. They were emotional check-ins, her way of making sure he was still there without having to actually face the intimacy she feared. This is what we call breadcrumbing, tiny emotional offerings designed to keep you attached, but not close. And if you're not grounded in your self-worth, it can be easy to grab onto those crumbs, hoping they'll lead to something more. But they rarely do. Instead, they keep you in emotional limbo, never quite together, never fully apart. That's why it's so important to pay attention, not just to if they come back, but how. Are they consistent? Are they speaking with clarity? Are they showing signs of real emotional accountability? Or are they just dipping their toe in to see if they still have access to you? If it's the latter, that's not love, it's control. And your peace is worth more than another round of emotional roulette. 6. Empowering takeaway. Here's the part that really matters, the empowering takeaway. Yes, avoidants often do miss you, that part is true. But they don't miss you in the way you might imagine. Not in real time, not with the emotional urgency or clarity that says, "I realize what I lost and I want to show up differently." Instead, they tend to miss you in fragments, in delayed waves, quiet moments and restless nights when your presence used to soothe something they didn't know how to name. But that kind of missing doesn't always lead to meaningful action. And that's where a lot of people get hurt, confusing emotional longing with emotional readiness. The deeper truth is this: their missing you is not your responsibility. It's not a sign to re-engage. It's not a cue to break your silence or lower your boundaries. Their feelings, especially when they're still emotionally unavailable, don't guarantee change. What matters far more is what you do with the space their absence creates. Silence isn't just something you sit through until they return. It's something you use to reclaim your emotional clarity, to breathe again, to reconnect with the parts of you that got lost in the waiting. I worked with a woman named Alyssa, who after 6 months of going back and forth with her avoidant partner, finally stopped responding. She didn't make a dramatic exit, just a clear, kind boundary. No games, no chasing. At first it was hard. She doubted herself, worried he'd forget her, questioned if she was walking away too soon. But in that silence, she started to hear herself again. She reconnected with her friends, picked up painting again, even started therapy, not for the relationship, but for her own healing. And wouldn't you know, 2 months later he reached out. But this time she wasn't waiting for it, she was ready to evaluate it. Because that's the shift. You're not here to wait for someone to figure out how to love you. You're here to choose relationships that don't require you to sacrifice yourself for connection. The goal isn't to be missed, it's to be met. Emotionally, consistently, fully. So yes, avoidance may miss you. But the better question is, will you be so deeply rooted in your own peace by then that you'll know the difference between being needed and being truly loved? That's your power. That's your healing. That's where freedom lives. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with something clear, compassionate, and empowering. You are not here to chase clarity from someone who fears closeness. You're here to build relationships where clarity is offered freely, not dangled like a reward for silence or sacrifice. In this video, we explored the truth behind a question that haunts many people post-breakup. Does the avoidant miss me when I'm silent? And the honest answer is yes, often they do. But their missing you is rarely straightforward. We've seen how avoidants disconnect as a defense, how your silence disrupts their emotional pattern, and how they often return late and cautiously, not out of clarity, but out of emotional discomfort. We broke down the breadcrumbing behavior, the emotional delay, and the slow-burning inner conflict that plays out behind the scenes. But most importantly, we shifted the focus back to you. Because your healing isn't found in whether they miss you. It's found in what you choose to do while they're gone. Do you chase or do you rise? Do you re-engage with someone who hasn't changed? Or do you reconnect with your own peace, your own needs, your own voice? Let your silence be more than a tactic, it should be a sanctuary. A space where you return to yourself, where you stop measuring your worth through someone else's emotional confusion, where you start asking, what does love feel like when it's safe? Because that's the love you deserve. If this message resonated with you, thank you for watching. Your time, your heart, your healing, it all matters here. If you're on this journey of breaking attachment cycles and choosing emotional maturity, subscribe to the channel so we can walk it together. And if you've been through something similar, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me what spoke to you, what you're leaving behind, or what you're reclaiming. And remember, you don't have to be perfect to be loved. You just have to be present. Start with yourself. The rest will follow.